Amongst the youth, winging it is a lot of times considered an item of pride. For example, hey man, I got this grade on this paper and I just winged it. But in professional circles, it is generally frowned upon. Now, what I'm suggesting is perhaps we should encourage it. Now, bosses, professors, teachers, business managers, don't kill me yet. Give me a second to explain myself. Now, for you guys in the front row or near here, you're in the splash zone. This is going to be interactive, so you might get a little wet, okay? Now, I don't want to box people in, but for the sake of time, let's say there's 3 types of people. The first one would be someone who is super prepared. You plan something out entirely, you have all the details figured out, and you know exactly how you want it to happen. Can I get a show of hands for that? Anybody? Okay. Now, if you don't mind me asking, do you ever feel like you're a little frazzled when it goes off your plan and it's off topic and it didn't go exactly how you planned it? How extreme? Okay, so if it gets derailed a lot, would you feel a little thrown off by that? Okay. Now, the second type, and this is where I was a few years ago, is completely unprepared. You just go, and as things happen, you adapt to the changes and you just work with it. Can I get a show of hands for that? Anybody? Okay. Now, do you ever feel like if you had prepared a little more, you could have had a little bit of a better performance? You do? You do. Okay. And the third kind is those who are partially prepared. You plan it out, but as changes come, you adapt to it. Can I get a show of hands for that? Okay, a lot of hands go up for that. Now, what I found is when I go into detail and explain that a little more and tell people exactly what I mean by that, meaning that they adapt properly and they solve the situation, but they were prepared at the beginning, less hands go up because that's where a lot of people want to be. So let's look into that. Now, here's my story. I was studious in college. I would do the homework and the reading, but I would just do the bare minimum. I would never go beyond that. So if I had a presentation, I would be knowledgeable about my presentation, but I wouldn't actually practice it. I wasn't sure exactly how it would turn out. Now, this is something that I went from struggling with, being prepared, to something that I actually started toying with. As classes changed and progressed, they went from gen ed to actual research projects. Sophomore year, I started looking into orators. Now, an orator isn't just someone who speaks publicly. They are someone who does so especially eloquently. And I had always been interested in them, but sophomore year is when I really started to look into it. I looked into Sam Adams, Winston Churchill, Martin Luther King Jr., Daniel Tosh, yes, the comedian, and Hitler. Now you may be going, whoa, Hitler. No, I'm not agreeing with his concepts, and no, I don't speak German, but if you watch his speeches, he had an incredible connection with his audience. And what I found was that all of these had 3 principles. Now, if you're a little confused on how this ties into winging with it, bear with me and I'll bring it full circle. The 3 principles are, the first thing is they knew their audience. Now, what do I mean by that? They knew who they were speaking to. What was their education level? Should they be selling their speech with emotion or logic? What was the audience's opinion? The second thing was that they had a natural delivery. Now, that's not to say that it was informal, but they had a good connection with their audience, and the audience could relate to them. And the third thing is that they were an expert on what they were talking about. They knew their subject. Let's take an example of this. Patrick Henry, the American forefather, once said, "Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death." Now, why is that so powerful so many years later? Well, audience. He knew he was dealing with riled-up colonists who were upset about their situation, but were hesitant to go to war with, at the time, a world superpower. He knew his subject. He wasn't naive. He knew the consequences were possibly death for what he was calling the colonists to do. He wasn't naive, and he was willing to sacrifice his life for it. And the third thing is his delivery. The words were carefully chosen, but they had a deep connection with his audience. Let's look at another speaker, Abraham Lincoln. Perhaps his most famous speech, the Gettysburg Address. Now, there are some rumors that he wrote it on a napkin on the train over to Gettysburg. Historical research has actually shown this to be inaccurate. He pre-wrote the Gettysburg Address at the White House. However, when he arrived at Gettysburg and saw the carnage of the battlefield, he felt his speech was not proper for it. He went back to his quarters that night and he rewrote it. And what he delivered the next morning was a speech incredibly powerful. But what if he didn't have the chance to go back to his quarters and rewrite that? So let's get back to how I was doing in college. Throughout it, I would continue to prepare only 70 to 80%, and on presentations, I stopped preparing verbatim altogether. Instead, I relied on just using bullets. The results that I found were that my delivery was more natural. The other thing is I became acclimatized to thinking on the spot. I could read my audience. If they weren't responding to what I was saying, perhaps I needed to change it. If they didn't understand what I was speaking about, maybe I needed to stay on that section a little bit longer. My anxiety levels were much lower because I didn't need to worry about forgetting one line in my speech. And, like I said, I had a better connection. But here's my favorite thing. My favorite thing is I did all this for less work. And if any of you have gone to college, you know that time is money. You have to be very efficient, especially if you're taking a lot of credits. Now, the prior orators that I listed and all their speeches, they were rehearsed. In fact, Benjamin Franklin said, "By failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail." Likewise, Abraham Lincoln said, "I will prepare, and someday my chance will come." So what am I suggesting here? Am I contradicting these two very wise men? No. What JFK said is, the time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. Now, how I interpret this is that before you're up there speaking to people or doing whatever you have to do, you should practice something coming at you that you weren't quite ready for. Practicing winging actually prepares you. Now, in 1976, at the GOP convention, Gerald Ford was nominated. The crowd started chanting for Ronald Reagan to come up and give a speech. He came up and gave an impromptu speech so powerful that some people there have been heard to say that there was a feeling amongst the delegates that they had nominated the wrong person. Now, I'm sure he had a speech rehearsed, but I doubt he had one prepared for actually losing. Yet, he was able to go up, adapt on the spot, and deliver a speech so powerful, and as we all know, in 1981, he became president. Now, all this is good and well if I say it, and you believe it, and then we just walk out of here and we all have that in our mind. But that creates a bit of a conundrum there, because if I didn't actually believe it myself, well then it would be pointless. So I'm going to go off script here a little bit, and the producers of this event might be freaking out a little, but they can't do anything to me while the cameras are rolling, so work with me here, all right? What I'm going to ask is that a member of the audience is going to ask me a question, and I'm going to have to answer this. Now, what I've found is, as I've practiced this concept more and more, you don't necessarily have to be an expert on your subject. Instead, you can have a general knowledge of it. So I'm an amateur motorcyclist. About a year ago, I started riding, and I'm not a mechanic. I'm by no means an expert, but I'd like to call on a member of the audience with some knowledge of motorcyclists to ask me a question, and then we'll see if I can answer it. So can I get a volunteer? Anybody? Yes, sir.
What kind of bike would you say would be the best for a just starting out motorcyclist,
So what he asked is, what kind of motorcycle would be best for someone who is just starting out on riding a motorcycle and they've never owned a bike before? I've practiced acclimatizing to the spot. I take a deep breath, I take that, and then I respond. The best type of motorcycle for someone that would be one that fits their size. So if they're a larger fellow, they may want one that's a little more powerful. If they're smaller, perhaps a smaller engine. Now, you don't want to go with an engine that is so powerful that you can't handle it. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? Okay, so for someone who is a little smaller, perhaps a 250cc motorcycle would be appropriate. If you are a little heavier, that may not have the power you want, and you may want to go with a 600cc. Now, I couldn't have done that a few years ago, but it's something that I've practiced, and I'm jealous of those who are able to do it naturally. But with work, I was able to get here. William Shakespeare said, "All things are ready if our minds be so." So how do we make our minds so? Now, the reason this isn't called the science of winging it is because it's not a science. It's currently an art. There's no formula that I can just hand you and you can use to wing this. In fact, for this thing here, this speech right here, I've tried using this concept. Anyone who has seen me at rehearsals knows now that this speech does not match any of the ones I've done before. I'm instead relying on bullets, and I didn't memorize this speech. I was able to interact with the audience. I was able to answer a question that I did not know was going to come, and this is something that I've had to work for. But for you guys, it may be a little different. Now, I'm not saying go and compromise your grades in college, but perhaps if you have a presentation, before you give it, practice selling it to your roommate before you've planned out all the wording. This can apply to many aspects of many jobs: professors, teachers, musicians, business managers, event organizers, musicians, actors. But I found two occupations that it works in that especially fascinates me. EMTs. Now, you may say, how come this doesn't apply to doctors? Well, doctors do have to adapt to different medical situations, but they have years and years of extensive training. I also am in no way recommending that a brain surgeon just wing it. However, if you don't know, you can actually become an EMT in a mere matter of months. And if you've ever watched them work in high-stress situations where there are lives on the line, they adapt, they stay calm, and they do their job. And they can come upon an incident that they have never seen before, and they're still able to do their job. And this is because they've actually practiced reacting to situations that they've never seen before. The second occupation is comedians, stand-up comedians. Have you ever watched a comedian and you see them pointing to different members of the audience and pulling questions? They are so confident in their ability to find humor in all aspects of life that they will base their paycheck off of talking to one person and being able to make the whole audience laugh. Now, some would argue that these comedians have a bank of jokes that they use, and they'll ask that person questions until they find that area they want, and then they'll use that joke. However, they still have to adapt to that specific situation. The United States military is actually using this, and this is what fascinates me so much. They have a concept they're calling mission command, and the point of it is to create versatile leaders. In the U.S. Army Doctrine Publication 6.0, they actually state that the objective is to concentrate on objectives of an operation, not how to achieve it. It then goes on to say, subordinates then exercise disciplined initiative to respond to unanticipated problems. Unanticipated problems. If we have such a high-profile, globally reaching organization that is well prepared, actually practicing being unprepared, why aren't we applying this to different aspects of our life? Why aren't we applying this to our business, to our education? Why aren't we researching this? Now, TEDx, ideas worth sharing. I don't have enough proof to come up here and say this is exactly how you should do it. But this is an idea I had that I felt I should share. What if we started looking into this? What if we started researching it and found there are certain techniques we can use to improve all these aspects of our life? Winston Churchill said, "To each there comes in their lifetime a special moment where they are figuratively tapped on the shoulder and offered the chance to do something great, unique to them and fitted to their talents." What a tragedy if that moment finds them unprepared and underqualified for that which could have been their finest hour. There are certain things you cannot prepare for, and practicing being unprepared is the best way to prepare for them. Thank you.